The Alberta government is in its second week of defending controversial Bill 20, legislation which would ban tabulators and allow political parties in municipal votes. But the good in the bill is being overshadowed by this bit, which would allow the Alberta cabinet to fire city councillors and overturn local bylaws when it's in the public interest. Now listen, you don't have to look far in Alberta to find an example of a city council which is running their municipality into the ground. If you live in Red Deer, you either have to look an hour and a half to the south or to the north to find an example of a city council that's wreaking havoc on hard-working, tax-paying citizens. But more government is not the solution here. If you don't like your city councillors or city council, then the onus is on you to organize to remove them. If you're still unconvinced, imagine the damage a future NDP government could do with this type of legislation. Those rare voices of common sense on your city council would become less and less common. But even if the Conservatives are the only government to use this legislation, and they use it to remove politicians I don't like, I still won't support it. Because whether the politicians want to act like it or not, we still live in a democracy. And in a democracy, the will of the people, not the government, will be imposed. I'm Rachel Emmanuel, and this is the Alberta Roundup.
Rachel Emmanuel brings the news each day on Alberta Roundup. She has her say.
Okay, everyone, taking a look at our first story here. The Alberta government is once again defending controversial legislation, that's Bill 20, saying it could stop non-citizens from voting in Calgary. The Alberta government's Bill 20, the Municipal Amendment Statutes Act, would give Cabinet the power to fire councillors or overturn local bylaws when it's in the public interest. The proposed legislation comes as Calgary City Council last week passed a motion to allow non-citizens to vote in municipal elections. Speaking specifically about Calgary's decision to allow non-citizens to vote, Premier Smith said, quote, "That is simply not appropriate nor within their authority. Bill 21 will provide the province with a tool to deal with these rare but serious examples of municipal overreach." However, Municipal Affairs Minister Rick McIver has already said that he will not change the rules to allow non-citizens to vote in municipal elections, begging the question, why is Bill 20 needed? Certainly there are some good aspects of the bill, as I mentioned earlier in the show, but the parts that would allow the province to dismiss city councillors or overturn bylaws might be a step too far. Taking a look at our next story here, by now you've likely seen some images of pro-Palestinian protesters holding encampments at Canadian universities all across the country. The latest of these happened at the University of Calgary, but protesters weren't there very long, with Calgary police coming and disbanding the protest on Thursday night. In some scenes that appeared very Freedom Convoy-esque, police came and marched through the encampment and forced protesters to move. Some of the best coverage of that night was from Rebel News. Here's some images taken by friend of the show, Sid. I'm going to play a bit of a longer clip for you guys so you can get a real sense of what happened on Thursday night. And if you guys thought that was the craziest clip I was going to play for you on today's show, you would be wrong. You're never going to believe what Alberta bureaucrats are spending your money on now. This week, I had Chris Sims, the Alberta director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, on my show, and she told me a little bit about the Teddy Waste Awards. Those are awards that are given to the person who wastes the most amount of money. In Alberta, the award was handed to the Alberta Foundation of the Arts for giving $30,000 to a so-called artist to produce some rather interesting work. I could explain what your money is funding, but I think it's better if I let the images speak for themselves. We'll play that clip now.
Here quickly in Alberta, actually the provincial category, it was the Alberta Foundation for the Arts. They won it for the provincial category here in Alberta because they gave something like $30,000 to an Alberta artist who drew a painting that Franco Terrazzano described as ants on a Pop-Tart, is what it looked like. That was in New York. And another performance she did was in South Korea, which was, I think, about 8 minutes long, and it was a video. And it was her on one of those lawn chairs, you know, the ones that fold up like a lounge. And she was rolling around on it for like 8 minutes.
Moving on to our next story here, the Alberta government has launched Phase 3 of its Alberta is Calling campaign, hoping to attract skilled workers from other parts of the country. But at a time when Alberta is seeing record-breaking population growth, some worry that the province is moving too fast. Phase 3 of the Alberta is Calling campaign launched on May 1st and is running ads in British Columbia, Quebec, and Ontario. This phase of the plan offers skilled tradespeople a one-time $5,000 refundable tax credit to entice skilled trades workers to come to Alberta and help build housing and infrastructure. Here's what Matt Jones, the Alberta Minister of Jobs, Economy and Trade, had to say about the phase in an interview with Global News this week.
It's laser focused on attracting skilled trades that we need to build Alberta's houses, schools, hospitals, and job-creating infrastructure.
According to Statistics Canada, Alberta's population surged by more than 200,000 residents last year. That's the largest annual increase in the province's history, and it's the equivalent to 550 people moving to Alberta every single day. My question of the week for you all is, do you want more people moving to Alberta, or do you think it's time to end the Alberta is Calling campaign? Obviously, the province is seeking to attract skilled workers this time, but I think it's safe to assume that lots of others will come along with them. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Moving into the controversy of the week, the United Conservative Party government is seeking to move the date of the election so that it won't collide with natural disasters. But in doing so, the opposition Alberta NDP says Danielle Smith's government is seeking to conveniently grant itself 6 extra months of power. The UCP government this week tabled legislation to move the scheduled date of the provincial vote from the 4th week of May every 4 years to the 3rd week of October. That would mean the next election would be October 18th, 2027, a time when there is less risk of wildfires, droughts, and floods. Smith told reporters that last year's election was a prime example of the dilemma, as her government had to campaign while also fighting fires and organizing evacuations. The premier said she had to be careful not to use the crisis to boost her profile while also needing to get word out to Albertans on what's happening with the fires. She said, quote, "Running an election parallel to this crisis made a difficult situation more challenging." The premier also said that she and government ministers faced fines from Elections Alberta for using government resources during the campaign. She said, quote, "I also found myself answering questions about the election at wildfire briefings, as well as questions about wildfires at campaign events." Here's what else the premier had to say.
Albertans need their government's undivided attention during an emergency.
Opposition leader Rachel Emmanuel, who we know will be resigning soon once the Alberta NDP select a new leader, said the UCP government is simply trying to give themselves more time in power. Take a listen.
You know, it could have been February of 2027, or it could have been October of 2026. But giving themselves an extra 6 months seems very self-serving and opportunistic.
And finally, moving into what we're watching in the weeks to come, following the city's largest ever public hearing, Calgarians will learn next week whether City Council heard their concerns and abandoned a proposal for citywide rezoning. Councillors will be able to question city administrators at a meeting on Monday. Following that, councillors will be able to vote on the proposed motion and any amendments that might be put forward. That's the warning for all of you who are living in Calgary. This weekend is your last chance to email your councillor and have your concerns about the rezoning proposal be heard. Calgary Mayor Jody Gondek said she thinks debate could last 2 to 3 days. Gondek closed the hearing on Monday night after hearing from 736 speakers and 238 panels. City Council also received over 6,000 written statements, now part of the public record. Councillor Dan McLean told us what we can expect on this show a few weeks ago. Let's take a listen to that now.
So what we're going to be having is several more days of debate. And then we will debate amongst ourselves, or several more days of public hearings. And then that's when the councils will debate and put amendments forward. The first thing I would like to do is put it back on the floor to bring it to a plebiscite, to refer it back to administration, say this is 80% of the population does not want this. Let's put it on the ballot and let's come back and at least start working on something that people is more tenable, that more people will support. We will see how that goes. I need 8 votes. It failed last time by 1 vote to take it to a plebiscite. So the odds are it might not pass this time. But again, Rachel, there's been so many people speaking against this. And so there's a few councillors that are really listening and have done polls in their own wards. So we need people to possibly vote with the public when it comes time. And again, not to go on too long, but there will be some amendments that some councillors will put forward to maybe try to water this down. Instead of maybe 4, 8, 12 units, they might make some concessions. But in my opinion, it's going to be, I can't tell you how people are going to vote, but it's going to come down to 1 or 2 councillors to see which way this goes.
Okay, everyone, and finally, moving into our weekly comment roundup, I pulled these comments from my midweek episode, which covered Alberta's plans for a high-speed rail, mostly because I was very curious what people think about the proposal. There were some pretty funny comments. Let's dive in. User Anolf Adventure said, I am really old, and they have been talking about a high-speed train since I was a kid. Studies mean that some people are getting our money and producing nothing. I agree with this comment. The government is going to be spending $9 million on a study to see ridership demands as well as infrastructure needs. That is $9 million before anything is even being built. I think if there is actually demand for high-speed railway, let's just leave that up to the private industry. We don't need to be spending our taxpayer dollars on this, especially at a time when we're really in a financial crisis as a province and as a people. I constantly am getting messages from people talking about how they're a couple $100, if not $100 away from making ends meet every month. So I don't really think this is the time for a high-speed rail line. That's just me. User Izzard P said, I'll bet Banff and Jasper are really excited to have the homeless drug addicts from Calgary and Edmonton chasing tourists away all summer. I had a pretty good laugh at that. Actually, when I first moved to Calgary, something I heard a lot from people was that Tuscany used to be a really nice place to live, and then they built the LRT out to Tuscany, and then they started to have issues with homelessness out there. So it is interesting that wherever there is these LRT lines cropping up, it just gives the homeless more ability to travel throughout the city and creates more problems that were once so much focused downtown. And it's true, when you're driving around Calgary now, I feel like you see homeless people kind of all over the place, walking along the highways in places that you wouldn't have expected to see them even just a few years ago. That being said, my favorite comment of the week goes to Tragically Clef, who said, we going to get Homer Simpson to drive this monorail? Definitely the best ever episode of The Simpsons. If you're a fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, everyone, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please like this video and subscribe to Tunora so you don't miss any of our content. I will be back on Wednesday with my regular programming. I hope that you guys have a great weekend. God bless.